I belong to a little subscription service that every now and again will send me a PDF article on some aspect of trading. It could be some obscure aspect of portfolio theory, or it could be something to do with trading psychology. But every now and again something odd slips through and appears on my feed. And by odd, I mean that someone has gone to the considerable effort of generating a PDF of an entire book. But there is a second part to the strangeness, because the people who post these PDFs don't actually understand that if you put your name next to the PDF, that doesn't mean that you've written the book. And no matter what you say, nothing will convince people that you have written the book, simply because the real author's name is writ large on the front cover of the book. And the latest one that popped through was this, Way of the Turtle by Curtis Faith, who was one of the original Turtles. The Turtles present an intriguing little story, and this is not the first and only book to be written about the Turtles. There are many, and there will undoubtedly be many more. The reason there are probably so many, and the reason it is such an attractive story, is that it is a somewhat unusual story for commodities markets. But I think the main attraction is simply that the Turtles in their heyday, which seemed to be a 5-year period from 1983 to 1985, generated quite staggering returns. And I think much of the motivation for writing these books is to say, well, these people were given a magic system. I know the rules of the magic system. If you buy my book /course/video, I will give you the magic system and you too will become a millionaire. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Turtle story, it's probably best that you brush up on your market history and do a bit of Googling. But to save you a little bit of time, the Turtles were let's call them a trading education experiment that was undertaken by Bill Eckhardt and Richard Dennis, both immensely successful commodity traders in their own right. Legend has it, and Eckhardt later sort of disagrees with the strict interpretation of the legend, that they had a disagreement that trading was either an innate skill, you either had it or you didn't, or it could be taught. And so to test their hypothesis as to whether it could or could not be taught, they placed an ad and set about interviewing various individuals to generate their little experimental batch. Now, if this sounds oddly familiar in some way, shape or form, it should. It's very, very similar in theme and plot to the 1983 film Trading Places, which, by the way, is probably one of the best explanations of quantities trading you will ever come across. This little group were given a system, and it is the system that Dennis and Eckhardt used, and it was based around the notion of either a 20-day breakout or a 55-day breakout. There is nothing revolutionary in this. This is just a variation on a Donchian channel. So these systems have been around for a very, very long time. This system would apply to a fairly diverse range of commodities, but a reasonably small universe, so it was quite easy to manage. And when plotted, the system looks like this. This is the 20-day breakout system. Blue arrows are buy, red arrows are sell. And this is plotted over coffee, which is one of the commodities they traded, for the period of their heyday. But what was most interesting about the strict functional aspects of the Turtle system is the application of volatility to position sizing. Many people in the intervening years have claimed to have invented position sizing, and particularly volatility-based position sizing. As much as I hate to rain on their parade, both Eckhardt and Dennis were using this coming on nearly 5 decades ago. So it is not new or revolutionary for them. For the rest of the markets, it was, because it was allowing the market and its volatility to tell you how many of a given instrument you could buy, and it had strict rules for adding to that instrument size. But this brings us back to this notion of their returns for this period. And this is a short period return. This is only a few years. And so we have to ask the question, well, what would have happened in the intervening years to this sort of system? Because it is marketed in its strictest form of being a 20 or a 55-day breakout as a magic system. It made these people staggeringly wealthy. Therefore, it should make you staggeringly wealthy if you buy my book, video / course. Fortunately, someone went to the trouble of working this out. And as you can see, it appears that the system stops working. And I don't really want to say stops working in the strictest form, because we have to be very careful about such dogmatic judgments. But what we do know is that the period in which the turtles experiment occurred was a very buoyant time for commodities traders. They may have just gotten lucky. And what is intriguing is that this was pointed out in a memo by Richard Dennis to everyone, saying that their real-world drawdowns were far in excess of what their theoretical modelling had expected them to achieve. And what they'd worked out is the position sizes were simply far too large for the account sizes they were trading. So think of it this way, they had a confluence of trending commodities markets and trading position sizes that were far too big. When you get lucky in that way, you generate outsized returns. That's somewhat akin to winning the lottery, so we have to be aware of that. So let's put the notion of luck to one side and ask what else has changed during the intervening time. Well, commodities markets have changed a lot. There have been enormous changes in both technology and participants, and also market structure. And all of these may have an impact, along with difficulties in the system. And I'll point out now, the turtle system has a basic fundamental flaw that is easily fixed. I will leave you to work out what that is. We come back to the universe that the turtles traded, and you can see that I've highlighted 2 of these boxes in yellow. And it is these markets that I feel have undergone the most fundamental change in terms of their structural components. Yes, there's been a lot of change in foreign exchange as well. You'll see that the turtles traded a range of foreign exchange futures contracts. The majority of foreign exchange trading now does not occur on futures markets. It occurs on a peer-to-peer basis, a bank-to-bank basis. Futures markets are very, very small. It's not to say they're irrelevant, but they are very small in terms of the overall trade in foreign exchange. There's been massive globalization in commodities markets. We've gone from isolated individual countries and their markets to a global market with a free flow of information across them. This, in many ways, has resulted in removals in inefficiencies in markets. Markets are never truly efficient, but emerging markets, and you have to remember that a lot of futures contracts for commodities in their modern form were quite young when the turtles started to trade them, so people were inexperienced at them. The second point is competition. There are now massive commodities trading firms like Glencore. You are competing against them in commodities markets, and you're competing against their tremendous advantages that they have. You also have changes in market efficiency. A lot of exchanges have merged, and that merging has created a mass that was not in existence when things such as the old New York Coffee Exchange existed. That's now long gone and is part of a giant global electronic network. So all of these things combine to change the tone of markets. So what does that mean for systems like the turtle systems or systems in general? Do they just stop working? I think the answer to that is more nuanced than simply saying yes or no. That's somewhat silly and dogmatic. Breakout systems clearly work within the confines of the way they are applied. If they did not work, people would not continue to use them. And trading individuals, firms, hedge funds and the like continue to use breakout systems with enormous success. But I also think part of the answer lies in an interview that Bill Eckhardt once gave with Futures magazine, and he was asked about the turtles experiment. He was also asked about his own trading first, and he said, "My own trading has evolved and changed as the world has changed. It still has the basic underlying scientific principles that initially guided it," and that's the important statement. His system is guided by a series of underlying principles, and you can guess as to what those principles might be. But the point he made about the turtles is that, yes, they were given a system, and yes, markets do change as we've seen, but most of the time of their education was spent on money and risk management and also trader psychology. So what the turtles who graduated from this program have done and continue to do is that they've simply evolved the basic system to meet the demands of the world as it changes. And that only works when you have a basic, simple idea. Any basic trading system should have very, very few degrees of freedom. That is, it should have very little wiggle room within it. Systems that have an enormous amount of wiggle room tend to be fragile. They tend to be prone to breakdown, and they also tend to be prone to inefficiencies. A blunt system, and the turtles is a blunt system, any breakout system is blunt. It's not very subtle because it simply says buy when price is X measure above a previous measure. That's it. They're immensely simple to implement. They're very simple to manage. And when coupled with this notion of volatility, position sizing and risk management, which was at the heart of the turtle's success, not the breakout system. As I said, the nuanced system's been around forever. It is this notion of how do you manage the risk that comes along with the trade. But more importantly, how do you manage your interaction with the system? When you have a system, you have points of contact with the market. The system has a point of contact, that is, it generates the entry and exit signals, but you have an interaction with the system that is one step removed from the market. And in that one step that is removed from the market, all sorts of problems can occur. And this is often where the problems in trading systems occur. It's not in the system's interaction with the market. It's in the way that the trader interacts with the system. So breakout systems are simple, they're efficient, and my view is, my experience, because I use a similar system, is that breakout systems like the turtle systems, once the basic flaw in them is corrected, remain very profitable. If they were not, people would not use them. But we come back to this notion that when you go back to the core of the turtles experiment, you see something extremely interesting. You see that a group of individuals were given an education by two immensely successful traders. If you read the profile of Richard Dennis, you are reading the profile of someone who borrowed a few $100s off his in-laws and then apparently turned that into a fortune worth several $100 million simply by dint of his own trading. So they had these two gentlemen sitting next to them funding their trading. Half of the people involved failed to make any money and disappeared. And only very few of the remaining turtles went on to be very, very successful money managers in their own right. So you have to ask the question, was it the system, or is it, as always, the individual driving the system?